County, sorry. Welcome to the Multnomah County Master Gardener Learn at the Demo Garden webinar series. We're happy to have you with us today. If you will put any questions that you have in the Q&A, not the chat, we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Today's presentation is creative ways to incorporate veggies in your garden with Carol Hardy. Carol teaches environmental science courses at Portland State. She has been a master gardener at the Demonstration Garden since 2021. She also volunteers as a backyard habitat certifier, helping people learn to create habitat for bees and other wildlife in their yards and gardens. And she is the vice president for the Multnomah County Master Gardener chapter. So Carol, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So this is kind of hopefully a fun and entertaining presentation because it is about being creative and saying, how do we think about gardens and integrating edibles into our gardens? So I hope my screen is not advancing. Come on. There we go. So when I started putting this presentation together, I start thinking about words. So it's like, well, what do we mean by a garden? And knowing that there are so many gardens, I thought we should start there and say, what are we really talking about when we talk about what is a garden? So then I did the geeky teacher thing and said, well, I'm going to go look it up and see what do other people say a garden is. So the Oxford Dictionary says it's a small piece of ground used to grow vegetables, fruits, herbs, and flowers. Merriam-Webster thinks it's a public recreation area or park, usually ornamented with plants and trees, or a botanical garden, which is something entirely different. I see Kew gardens or something huge. Wikipedia says it's a planned space, usually outdoors, set aside for display, cultivation, or enjoyment of plants and other forms of nature as an ideal setting for social or solitary human life. So here we start to get into what is the purpose of it. Indigenous tribes of the Northwest, the term for a garden is a food forest where lands are managed to cultivate foods by encouraging the growth of edible plants through clearing the land, use of fire, planting, and also the act of harvesting changes what is growing. So even more definitions. Natural gardening or landscaping is using native plants, including trees, shrubs, ground cover, and grasses, which are local to a geographic area. This is a native bed that we're showing here. And if you start looking at some EDU websites, gardening is a popular hobby involving cultivating plants for decorative functional purposes. I thought this was interesting because this is kind of the mindset that we're saying, really, what do we mean by a garden? There's three types: ornamental, edible, and environmental. So this is really a talk about how do we think differently and blur the lines between what are thought of as traditional European gardens. So two things all those definitions have in common: plants are the hero because plants are the producers. This is still really amazing to me every time I think about it. They're making their own food from abiotic elements that are floating around in the air, carbon dioxide, water coming in from their roots, and sunlight. They turn that into food so they can grow and food for us to eat, because humans are the ultimate consumers, and we're also the designers and shepherds of landscapes and gardens. And while plants may be the hero, it's really important, I think, as we think about what we plant and how we think about tending a garden, that everything in a garden is connected. So the plants are using photosynthesis so they can grow and produce. They're creating complex carbohydrates. Bees eat the nectar and pollen from their flowers so they can make fruits, nuts, berries, and they grow leaves and roots. The flowers and the fruits feed insects, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, and people, being a mammal. And these carbon-based life forms and plant material fall in the soil where decomposers break it down, matter into carbon, which is stored in the soils. The bacteria, insects, and fungus in the soils make the nutrients available to the plants to keep them healthy and growing, and the cycle goes on. So I think it's really easy sometimes to go in and say, I'm looking at this plant, I'm going to plant a pea. I know when to plant it. I'm going to plant it in its little hole on a trellis and not think about how it's part of a landscape. So that's why I started here is let's think of how all these plants are part of a landscape and a cycle of life. So humans are the ones that choose which plants to grow in a garden that influence this cycle of life. So how do we decide what we want to grow in our gardens? What plants do we choose and why do we choose them? Are we limited by our experiences in teaching, influenced by our cultures? Do we have to have flowers in the front yard that put on a show for the neighborhood? And we hide the veggies in the back with them marching down their straight little tidy rows, but we don't show them off. So that's pretty traditional. I say, let nature be your guide and creativity be your guide. So what do we mean by let nature be your guide? Nature teaches us that the more diversity you have, the more resilience you have in ecosystems and gardens. So think about life on Earth evolved and all the little critters evolved to fill an ecological niche so they could ensure their survival of individual species. And the greater the diversity of life, the more resilient systems are to disturbances like storms, flood, heat domes, meaning resilient ecosystems can recover from disasters. So the more types of plants, organisms, bees, birds that you have in an ecosystem, the more resilient it is, the more food it can provide to both people and wildlife. So I say plant for diversity. So here's an exercise that I'm hoping you're willing to contribute to. So I already asked this question of some of the volunteers who work at the demo garden, and they sent me their ideas. So we're going to talk about those. But in the Q&A box, don't think about it too hard, but say, why do you garden in one sentence? And at the end, we're going to come back and see what people say. So as we go through, just think about it and put it in the Q&A. What's interesting about what people sent to me, no one said, I garden to grow the perfect carrot. I garden to increase the value of my property, to win the first prize for the biggest pumpkin, or to impress the neighbors. Everybody's answer was far more personal than that, which I think is interesting because sometimes you hear, oh, plant a nice garden in your front yard and your property value will go up. That doesn't seem to be the inspiration for most of the people I've talked with. So one of the people who responded is Jen Hazen. And this is a picture of one of the pictures of her beautiful, beautiful yard. She said why she first started gardening was to grow healthy food for her family. And ultimately, the goal was to have a surplus so she could donate to food pantries. Importantly, though, I think this is kind of the key idea that I heard repeated is in a way that nurtures the land, pollinators, and other wildlife. So here you can see this is at the base of a fig tree. And what her approach is she interplants veggies and fruits and flowers and nitrogen fixers around the base of each of her fruit trees. So here you're looking at strawberries, comfrey chives, violets, and dead nettle and other trees. She's got asparagus and kale. bee balm and other plants. And this is the other thing that I think is really key to how do you create diversity and figure out what works, is try it and experiment. It's a process. It's fun to see what grows. This is Heidi, who said, I garden because it gets me outside and moving and makes me feel good. So here's an example of why I love to go to the demo garden. We had a mission to transform the center top piece of the garden that was growing mostly monoculture or several kinds of grass, and said, we want to do something different with this land. We didn't know yet what it was, but we said, let's mulch it and give ourselves a place to be creative. And I think we had 11 people out here in a day. They put down a layer of manure, leaves, like 4 inches, no, more than that. It's like 6 inches of mulch to smother the grass and give us a good place to plant. So I love that. And the fact that we were saying, we don't know yet what we're going to do, but we're going to have a clean slate to do something. Jack Lazarick, who also comes out to the garden, says, I garden for the challenge of succeeding where there are no guarantees. And I include here where this was in that same area of the garden. We said, let's try growing some veggies in the ground in this area. And we said, well, it's kind of rocky. We don't know if that's going to work. It's really hard clay. And we said, let's just try it. And this is carrots and beets in a intercropped bed that we'll look at more later, which also supports what Jack's saying. It's to try when we don't know. It's the joy of eating delicious, safe foods because we know what's in them. And the glory of the creating beauty to surround me, which is what we try to do, I think, in all of our gardens, is to create a nice place to be. I loved plants, tending them, watching them grow along with the wildlife in the garden, is what Stephanie Pringle said. And this is our garden grown up, one of the gardens in this area. We kind of went nuts with the planting. We had several kinds of squash and beans and mustard and chard. And then we put a bunch of wildflower seeds in. We got great squash production. Those are the acorn squash. And in there hiding was a praying mantis, which said we had a really good balanced insect population in this garden. There were bees, bumblebees, other native bees that were hanging out on the flowers and pollinating our squash. So to me, this kind of wild, a little bit messy bed was beautiful and fun to look at and produce some great vegetables and lots of insects. Other gardeners said to attract wildlife to my yard, give them food and shelter. So on the left, we have the North Hedgerow at the demo garden, which has 5 canopy layers, mostly natives. This is spring bloom. You can see all the different varieties there. On the right, it's a friend of mine's yard who has platinum certification under the Backyard Habitat, which means at least 50% of her yard is native plantings. She has a white oak prairie, which you can't see, which I think she has like 8 white oak. Now she has huge yard, which we all don't have, of course, but she's transforming it into an oak prairie that has a combination of this wildflower meadow, which is about 3 years old, and integrated vegetables within there. Another gardener who works at the demo garden, Functional Louis, says it's about celebrating culture and connecting with the community. So this is an outline of a dragon, which she designed, that's grass, but within and without different veggies are planted. And what she says is a garden is not just about growing fruits and vegetables. It can be a very special landscape by designing various patterns. It can also be a bond for the community, adding interest, sparking discussion, You can write a love story in your own garden and wait for it to germinate, which is a small surprise for your family. So another motivation that inspires a different design, which she brought in a design from her culture. Just a couple of days ago, there's a group of us who work out in the demo garden on Saturdays. And I asked them, why do you garden? And there was kind of a group discussion, so I can't say exactly who said it, but then the whole idea was it's a great escape. I can go out in my garden or a garden, wander, not think about anything, but the nature in front of me, and tending my garden drowns everything else out, where doing something else like trying to listen to TV or music doesn't have the same impact as just going around and wandering through the garden. So this is, I don't know where this garden is actually, but it's like go through the gate and into your garden and you're in a different world. Okay, come on in. Okay, it really likes that picture, so it's not advancing. There we go. These are just other comments. I garden to feel connected to the earth and soil. There were several of that. To do something tangible in the natural world. Gardening is life affirming. I do it for mental health. I can set a small goal and accomplish it. I really like that Linda said that one, which I think that is really good. You can go out, work for a little bit, plant something and go, I not only did it, but I'm going to watch something grow. Many people talked about helping feed the community. So what are you going to do in your garden? I think that's always a question. So this is just an exercise if you want to do it, but spend a minute and envision what you would do. What if you just had a blank slate, what would your garden look like? What does it grow? What color is it? Does it have a certain smell? Do you integrate your favorite veggies, favorite flowers and herbs? What would it look like if you just could start from the beginning? And it's a really great exercise to just think about what inspires you rather than saying, I'm going to try to go do what I was taught. Certainly, we should apply what we were taught as master gardeners, but this is about what do you feel? What makes you happy? What do you want to grow? So here are some ideas from master gardeners that should say, looking at more food forests, mixed plantings and container gardenings, just to give us some new ideas. These are mixed potatoes that were planted in burlap bags. These are from Jen. I think it's Pasillo. I asked her, but I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly. This is another one of Jen Hazen's photos from her food forest. This is showing currants, which are lovely. There's chives growing in the front, marigolds. This is another one of Jen Pasillo's mixed beds. She's got some great examples. She says, I always try to combine vegetables, flowers, and herbs in each of my raised beds for variety and because it looks really nice to her. This bed has 5 different types of cucumbers. One of them that's shown is the Shintakwa, but she has pickling cucumbers in there. She planted nasturtiums at each end of the bed for a pop of color, uses the leaves in salads and also as a companion plant because it repels bugs. This is another of her beds, melons and peppers. It gets the most sun. So it was planted with some melons in each corner, 9 different pepper plants. The tallest pepper is a padron. That's my favorite pepper. Next to it is shishita. She lets the melon crawl out of the bed. So she uses less water than trellising it is why she does that. So she built some bean teepees using some leftover sticks from her tomato plants. They didn't work very well for tomatoes, so she tried beans on them. These are scalzo Italian beans. She lashed the teepees together with twine. She planted these raspberries behind from her husband's grandfather's garden, which is remarkable. And as you can see, she's also got this backdrop of her neighbors, roses and catmint, which I think creates a lovely mixed planting, even though she didn't do the whole thing. Densely planted multi-veg bed. So here she's got nasturtiums, zucchinis, peppers. Her experiment here was to see how densely she could and diversely she could plant a bed. And it did really well. It produced a lot of food, but she kept having to keep the zucchini in check because it wanted to overgrow the space, but she just managed it. So this is a bed in the demo garden. This bed here has peppers and eggplants. They were just beautiful. You had to see them to see how remarkable and productive they were. Buckwheat was planted as a cover crop in that bed, and it was Rich intended to remove it, but some of them was left, and you can see it blooming underneath, and it was attracting all sorts of pollinators. So it got left in place, which is an interesting thing to consider about with cover crops is, do you cut them? Do you leave them? Do you like the look of them? I think it's gorgeous. This is a multi-veg bed in the demo garden. This is Martha and Vicky. They grew green onions, peas in the fall. They planted them in the spring and again in the fall, I believe. Pak choy was planted in the spring. Carrots, kale, and marigolds and alyssum were interplanted there for a mixed planting with fruits, with vegetables and flowers. Observation is they need to continue to work on management of watering needs. When you've got a mixed bed, you've got to think about, do they have the same watering needs? And what happens to the soil quality? Again, cover crops may be something that help improve that and also add some interest in pollinators. So all these beds combine flowers and veggies. So why might you do that? So they can support each other physically and functionally. One could provide shade for another. They can harbor insect predators to keep insect populations in balance. They can support pollinators so plants can reproduce, bear fruit, seeds, nuts. They can cover the soil and hold moisture in and keep the weeds out. They can feed the critters in the soil. The more diverse the plants, the more diverse the soil life and wildlife. And it's pretty, and people say it makes them feel good, feeds the birds and the bees. And this is just a fun thing because some of you know I just got back from a trip to New Zealand and there are amazing gardens there. This is my daughter who I traveled with, and this is Hobbiton. Now, I would like to go and live there forever, but they wouldn't let me because it's a movie set and you have to pay to visit there. But I would go live there any day. This is the Bag End. There are mixes of vegetable and fruit all through it, which I think is part of the magic of this place. This is a scarecrow in their mixed garden. It's kind of wild and crazy. This is another shot of it. Like I said, this is where I would live. This is another garden that I think is just fascinating and amazing, but it's also, it mixes in this woman's art, which she makes these huge mosaic designs, but it's interplanted with veggies and fruit in all sorts of decorative ways, looking at textures. And she also integrates her garden into the backdrop of these hills of Akaroa and integrates magical creatures. It depends on where you're standing, what you can see. Here's a magician in the center here. So I just wanted to share that for fun, but it's also a message about when you go somewhere, look at what they do, because if you see something you like, bring that idea home. So Linda mentioned that I volunteer for the Backyard Habitat program. So I did want to bring forward some information about the value of integrating native plants into veggie gardens. They improve pollination. That's one reason. There's many reasons, but that's one. And instead of traditional Lissum, Cosmo, and nasturtiums, try some native plants that are very beautiful. Globegilia, that's the one that's the purple one in the far left. Clarkia, Farewell to Spring, is the pink one in the lower corner. Lacy Facilia is not seen here, but it's purple, beautiful flowers. All Heal is the one in the top corner. California poppies, all of these are native plants that bloom at different times that you could use instead of the traditional flowers. So what do we mean by they help pollination? So 80% of our crop plants depend on pollination to some extent or another. Brassicas and cucurbits rely on 100% on insect pollination. Tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, and peppers have flowers that have both male and female parts that can self-pollinate, but studies show that native bees like leaf cutters and sweat bees create vibrations that's called buzz pollination. So if they go in a flower, that buzzing actually helps with pollination. So there are native plants that also support predator populations. So meaning parasitoid wasps, predatory beetles, and those can help balance insect populations that tend to feed on our veggies and fruits. So some native plants that support beneficial insects are showy milkweed, that's this one up in the corner here, slender cinquefoil, showy fleabane, this is Hooker's onion. So beautiful plants, and they help balance our insect populations. If this is not an insect you know about, you should. The syrphid hoverfly, they're both pollinators and predators. So they're really great insects to attract to your garden. As adults, they're pollinators. As larvae, they're heavy, hungry predators. So they eat bugs we don't like. And some of the native plants that support these are the fernleaf biscuit root, Pearly Everlasting, the corner here, goldenrod, solidago here, showy fleabane, and common madia. And to look up close, this is a hoverfly. This is a hoverfly larva. This is the size of them, so you get a sense. So if you see them in your garden, you should be happy about that. So here's another list, and this, so you know, this presentation will be posted on the demo garden Google Drive, and we'll send you a link to it along with a recording, so you don't have to write all this down, or if you're interested, we'll send it to you. But thinking about native plants to mix in with veggie plantings, it's important to think about putting pollinators that will grow all year. So these are split by early bloomers, our red flowering currant, camas, fernleaf biscuit root, western buttercup, mid-season, and the LS, SS, GC, TS, those mean SS is a small shrub, a TF is a tall flower, a TS is a tall shrub. So there's a code somewhere in one of the slides that tells you. But mid-season, blue elderberry, bluegilia, broadleaf lupin, there's a bunch of them inside out flower, slender cinquefoil, late bloomers, clustered wild rose, common madia, rose spirea, showy fleabane. And the idea is you can layer those with veggies that can tolerate low water, because the other benefit of native plants is many of them, not all, but the ones mentioned here can tolerate low water. So that's an advantage to native plants that have, you know, they're adapted to our summer months where typically we don't have water in July and August, rain. So mix them with tomatoes, squashes, melons, peppers. Peppers like a little shade in the afternoon, so have a tall flower that grows next to it. If you're interested in indigenous foods, food forests, there are many, many native plants that are are grown in indigenous food forests. If you have room, white oaks are amazing plants for both wildlife species and food source. Quercus garryana, Camas, you can harvest the roots, beautiful flowers. Wapato, woodland strawberries. They are delicious and beautiful. Thimbleberries, I lost my thimbleberry picture. I don't know where he went. And salmon berries. Other first foods, evergreen huckleberries, choke cherries, gooseberries, nettles. If you don't touch them with your hands, if you boil them, they are delicious like spinach. They were a very important first food. Lady ferns, big huckleberries. I think this is a mountain blueberry, which I wasn't familiar with, but it does grow natively in the forests around here, near forested areas. So the other common first food I am sure you have all heard about, read about, is Three Sisters. I think it's really interesting in looking, if you're talking about mixed plantings and plants supporting each other, that is the reason that indigenous communities all over the world grow some variety of corn, beans, and squash together. So I've cut off my type here, but I will tell you what it says. So corn provides a natural structure for the bean vines to grow up. Beans fix nitrogen so they can improve soil fertility. If you leave the plants and the roots in the ground, they can improve soil fertility. Beans actually help stabilize corn plants from blowing over in strong winds. Shallow-rooted squash, which vine on the ground, are like a living mulch. So they suppress weeds, they hold in the water. And all of these three provide different nutrients for humans. So corn's carbohydrates, dried beans have protein and vitamins, not only from the fruit, but oil from the seeds. And they can be grown on small plots of lands, 3 crops. And so that's one of the reasons that they are grown globally, to support communities that have limited space for growing. Here's another just suggestion. If you want to try something, think about, well, how would you do something like this? Alternate plants, veggies and flowering plants. So if you have a really big space, you could do a blue elderberry, chokecherry as a background tree. On a trellis or a fence, you could plant beans, kiwi, grapes, something that's providing food. Peas, an early veggie that can tolerate some shade, could be nearby. Camas and friendleaf biscuit root are early bloomers. You could layer in interplant with slender chinkfoil and clarkia that are mid-season bloomers. Add some peppers and tomatoes with all heel mixed with common madia that are late season bloomers. Use your imagination, use plant lists, look at the times they bloom, and then size it to your space. You can plant a few, but try intermixing them. Here is a shameless plug for IE plant sale plants. So we're having our plant sale coming up May 11th. It is our main fundraiser for the Multnomah County Master Gardeners. There are 220 plus varieties of locally grown, organically grown veggies and herbs and edible flowers. And growing a salsa bed could be really fun. So plant a bloody butcher, dwarf tomato in the center, put a mix of different sweet and hot peppers, plant some onions on the edge and basil in between. Peppers and tomatoes don't need a ton of water, need less, so you could run a drip line for the ones that need more, but plant them all together. It's fun. You can do it in a small space, and check out our website and a link to the catalog of plants. So how do you begin? Make it super simple. Plan your garden and get a pencil and a piece of paper, literally. Measure. So one thing I do, they taught us to do at Backyard Habitat, is to measure your pace. So my pace is, one pace is about 2 feet. Do it over and over until you feel comfortable with it. And then go out and wherever you want to plant something and measure, pace off your space, mark it on your map. track the hours of sun and shade by section. So go out and look at different types of times of days, because that's really important. And certainly think about what time of year it is, because that will shift. Draw shapes to indicate big trees, shrubs, flowers that you want to keep. Draw shapes that represent invasives that you want to focus on getting rid of. Pick 3 to 5 plants that can grow together, both flowering plants and veggies. Pick some that have the same water and sun needs and put them in one place. Look at different heights, bloom times, and then plant, observe, adapt, enjoy. So adapt is really important. Plant them, watch them, see what grows. If you don't like what's happening or it isn't successful, that's okay, because that's part of the game and the joy. As Jack says, I like the chance of seeing if it's going to work. And I think all of us say, well, if it doesn't, I can always plant something else. And it's also the way that we learn, particularly as climate is changing and we have these hotter, drier summers. We need to start observing more what combinations of things work, what work with less water inputs. And I think that is the end of what I have to say. So since we're in a webinar, we can't bring people on screen, but we're going to take a look at what people put in the Q&A. I'll see if I can see it. Yes. So I'm going to read them off. And if you want to say something else, use the chat and Linda can monitor that. So Alice says, I like to garden because I feel like I'm tending living things and helping them flourish. So I think that is a really common thing that people said. And is that because that's where we grew up? We all grew up around plants of some sort, and it's really helping us go back to our roots and where we feel comfortable. So I really love that. Mike Rutherford says, I garden for my happiness and to bring nature into my life. A lot of people, the mental health thing, I can't stress enough of what people said. This really makes me happy and feel better. It's my escape. I love that. Bob and Barb Valdez, connecting with nature. Lorna says, I personally garden for the flowers. I had an agreement with the family that everything I planted would be edible. So I found a lot of edible flowers. So that's a way to look at edibles combined with growing flowers. I garden because it balances and centers me and because I enjoy it. So again, I think it's people find a place of peace, and finding things that you really like to plant, I think is important. Even if it doesn't work, try it and see what works. Tony says, restorative, gardening's a restorative, growing foods we enjoy makes me happy. Year-round visual enjoyment, and it smells good. So even if it's not a fragrant flower, I think you can walk out into a garden and smell those scents, and it feels like you're out in nature. Adele says to amuse herself. So it is a great pastime, isn't it? And it gets you out of the house and it's fun. So those are all of the comments we had. If you've got any questions or comments, we can answer those. If not, we will send out a link to the recording.
Carol, Jen says, thanks, some great picks and ideas for inspiration. So that's from Jennifer. And yes, we will send out the links, the recording, and the link to the slideshow by the end of this week to everyone. And we will also include our demo garden email address in case you want to reach out to us for any reason. And I believe, Carol, that we probably should also include the link for the IE sale
Yeah.
catalog in this. And then our next, our Come Learn at the Demo Garden webinar series is held the third Monday of each month, October through May. And the next session coming up will be April 15th. And I believe this is with Martha. Is this correct?
It
Yeah.
is.
Okay. So Martha Mealy will talk to us about the birds of the demo garden and observance. So we hope we can join us for that and for this very interesting talk about birds at the demo garden. And that's all I have. Carol, do you have anything else?
No, I don't. Thank you for coming, and hopefully we'll see you out in the garden.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
And Rich and Linda, I can jump on the other Zoom if
Okay.
you'd like. Okay,
Sure. Thank you.
thank you.